The night air drifts across a quiet garden. Lantern light glows softly against the paper walls of a wooden house, and beyond them, the distant hum of cicadas rises and falls like a lullaby. The scent of pine and damp earth lingers, and a pale moon hangs over tiled rooftops. It is here, in the stillness of Japan's ancient past, that the story of the samurai begins. They were more than warriors. They were guardians of villages and lords of provinces, archers on horseback, and poets with ink-stained sleeves. Their tale stretches across centuries, from the first stirrings of a fighting class to the moment their swords were set aside forever. But what draws you most to their world? The battles they fought, the discipline they lived by, or the quiet rituals that shape their days? Share your answer in the comments and let us know where you're listening from. And if you're enjoying this journey, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more sleep history stories. Now dim your screen. Let the air grow still. The story begins not with a clash of swords, but with silence. The kind of silence that drapes itself over a capital city when power rests in polished hands and courtly robes. It is the late Heian era, more than 9 centuries ago, and the heart of Japan lies in Kyoto, where courtiers in silk compose poetry and trace elegant characters with their brushes. The imperial family and aristocrats live in a world of refinement. Music from zithers fills the air. Gardens are carefully raked to mirror the harmony of the heavens. And seasons are celebrated with festivals as delicate as cherry blossoms drifting on the breeze. But beneath this surface of peace and artistry, another Japan exists. Beyond the polished corridors of the court, mountains and rivers stretch into provinces where farmers till the earth and villagers face the uncertainties of storms, poor harvests, and wandering bandits. The central government, for all its splendor, cannot always reach so far, cannot always protect the scattered communities from danger. And so, quietly at first, a different class begins to rise. Men who live not by ink and poetry, but by the bow and the sword. Imagine, if you will, riding down a narrow path through cedar forests at dusk. The air is cool, the light dim, and somewhere in the distance the rustle of a deer breaks the silence. A mounted figure approaches, armoured in lacquered plates, carrying a bow taller than himself. He is both a guardian and a shadow. He is not yet called samurai, as we think of the word today, but he belongs to the families who will become them. These warriors begin as provincial enforcers, tasked with defending estates and keeping order in lands that the elegant nobles of Kyoto own but rarely see. It is in this divide between courtly refinement and rural necessity that the roots of the samurai take hold. Aristocrats, unable to manage their distant lands, grant them to powerful families in exchange for loyalty and taxes. Those families, in turn, employ fighters to guard their wealth and enforce their claims. Gradually, the men of the sword grow in importance. They are not simply servants, they are protectors, negotiators, and, when rivals threaten, the sharp edge of survival. Their world is harsh and disciplined. In the early years, a warrior's pride lies in his mastery of the horse and bow. Before the katana would come to symbolize their spirit, the yumi, the long asymmetrical Japanese bow, was their signature weapon. From horseback, they would release arrows with remarkable grace, often announcing their names before charging into combat, declaring themselves so that their deeds might be remembered. Theirs was not the anonymity of soldiers lost in a crowd, but the bold individuality of men seeking honor through valor. Can you picture them on a misty morning? The field stretches out in silence, banners ripple in the breeze, and then a lone rider spurs his horse forward. He draws back the great bow, the string creaking, and lets fly an arrow that whistles across the air. Combat begins not with chaos, but with ritual, as if even battle itself should follow a pattern, a dance. These early warriors also lived by relationships, bound in loyalty. Service was their currency, and in return, they received land, wealth, or privilege. This system of give and take would eventually harden into feudal bonds, the foundation of samurai life. But in these first centuries, the lines are still fluid. Warriors are both protectors and challengers, serving one lord today, perhaps turning against him tomorrow if alliances shift. Honor is present, but it is not yet codified into the strict philosophy we later call Bushido. Instead, it is a raw thing, loyalty to one's clan, pride in one's skill, a hunger for recognition. In this dawn of the warrior class, families begin to emerge with names that will echo across Japanese history. The Minamoto and the Taira rise to prominence, each commanding networks of warriors bound by blood and loyalty. Their rivalries will one day shake the nation, but for now, they are part of a growing pattern, the shift of true power away from the distant court and into the hands of those who can command swords. And yet, life for these early samurai is not only about war. Off the battlefield, they are husbands, fathers, farmers, and administrators. They tend their lands, oversee their people, and take pride in the small rituals of daily life. Picture a warrior returning home. He dismounts, removes his armor, and sits quietly in a wooden hall, listening to the sound of rain tapping on the roof. His wife serves a meal of rice and miso soup. His children run to greet him, curious about the bow resting against the wall. In that moment, the world is not grand politics, but simple human connection, the same comforts we still long for across the centuries. The rise of the samurai is also shaped by belief. Buddhism, introduced centuries earlier, spreads through monasteries and temples. Some warriors find solace in its teachings, seeking balance between the violence they wield and the peace they crave. Others turn to Shinto, the ancient faith of kami, spirits that dwell in rivers, stones, and sacred groves. Imagine a warrior pausing before battle, tying a charm to his armor, or offering a prayer beneath a shrine's torii gate. In his heart, there is both fear and hope, both mortal fragility and the dream of divine protection. Slowly, a cultural shift begins to take shape. The samurai are no longer merely provincial enforcers. They are becoming a class unto themselves, distinct and powerful. Their stories spread in songs and tales, admired for bravery, feared for ferocity. Children in distant villages hear of them and wonder what it would be like to ride beneath their banners, to test one's skill with bow or blade. Yet even in this early dawn, shadows fall. With power comes rivalry, and with rivalry, bloodshed. Bands of warriors clash not only with outsiders, but with one another, testing loyalty and ambition alike. The imperial court, still radiant with poetry and art, begins to lean more heavily on these men of arms, even as it loses the ability to control them fully. A new balance of power emerges, one written not in brushstrokes, but in steel. What would it have felt like, living in those times, to be a farmer in the provinces, grateful for the samurai's protection yet wary of their demands? To be a young warrior, proud of his skill, but uncertain whether tomorrow's battle will bring honor or death. These are the quiet questions that echo through the centuries. Reminders that history is never only about empires and wars, but about the fragile lives of people who walked before us. As the 12th century draws closer, the samurai stand ready at the threshold of history's stage. Their banners ripple in the wind, their horses paw at the earth, and their stories, once whispered on lonely roads and in provincial estates, are about to blaze across the land. The Genpei War looms on the horizon, where great clans will clash, and the future of Japan will be decided. But for now, we leave them here in the twilight of their beginning. Figures half-shadowed, half-formed, yet already carrying within them the spirit that will endure for centuries. The mist of dawn lingers low across the fields. A soft light spills across the horizon, touching the tall grasses with gold, while the air is cool and hushed, broken only by the distant cry of a crane. It is in such landscapes that the samurai of early Japan found their calling, not as swordsmen first, but as masters of horse and bow. To understand the spirit of this age, one must imagine the rhythmic pounding of hooves and the whistling release of arrows, for mounted archery was the truest expression of the warrior's art. In the Heian and early Kamakura periods, the sword was still a secondary weapon. The bow, long and asymmetrical, was the pride of the warrior. It towered taller than a man, crafted with layers of bamboo and wood, its curve elegant, its pull demanding strength and skill. The yumi was not just a tool of war, but an emblem of nobility. To master it was to prove one's worth, to show both physical precision and spiritual discipline. Picture a samurai upon his horse. His armor, made of lacquered scales laced with silk cords, gleams faintly in the morning sun. His quiver sways at his side, filled with arrows feathered in hawk plumage. With steady hands, he draws back the great bow, his body leaning into the motion, his breathing calm and measured. The arrow is released. It arcs through the air, silent, until it strikes its mark with a deep, satisfying thud. Around him, other riders circle, each testing their aim, their speed, their composure. The practice is not chaotic, but rhythmic, like the beating of a drum. Mounted archery was more than combat training. It was a spiritual exercise. Warriors often believed that the steadiness of the bow reflected the steadiness of the heart. To shoot true, one needed not only muscle, but also focus, an ability to still the mind amid movement. In Shinto tradition, the arrow could even serve as a purifier, a tool that cut through evil spirits carrying divine force. To ride and shoot was to bring together body, spirit, and purpose. This art was celebrated in ritual as well as in war. From these early centuries came the practice of yabusame, ceremonial mounted archery performed before shrines. Dressed in hunting attire, warriors would gallop down a narrow track, loosing arrows at wooden targets set along the way. The crowd would fall silent, waiting for the whistle of the bowstring, the crack of impact. Success was not merely personal glory. It was seen as a blessing, a sign that the warrior's skill and the god's favor were aligned. Even today, yabusame survives as a cultural treasure, echoing across time the rituals that shaped the samurai spirit. But life was not all ceremony. These skills found their test in battlefields, where warriors announced themselves before charging. A duel might begin with two riders meeting in the open, each declaring his name, his lineage, his accomplishments. To remain anonymous was dishonorable. To die without being remembered was a fate worse than death itself. Then, with a sudden rush, hooves would strike the earth, arrows would fly, and the contest of bravery would unfold before the eyes of allies and enemies alike. The way of the bow and horse also shaped the rhythms of daily life. Warriors trained constantly, not only in riding and shooting, but in hunting. Hunting was both sustenance and sport, a chance to hone skills while providing meat for the table. Imagine the quiet of a forest, broken by the rush of deer startled into movement, followed by the sharp whistle of an arrow, then silence again. Around evening fires, hunters would share their stories, of near misses, of clever prey, of the arrow that found its mark. These moments stitched together bonds of camaraderie, strengthening the fabric of warrior clans. Yet, while martial discipline defined their outward identity, the inner world of the early samurai was no less important. Many found inspiration in poetry, in the fleeting beauty of nature, in the belief that to live as a warrior was also to live as a man in harmony with the world around him. In their verses, we find descriptions of autumn leaves falling like embers, of snow settling upon a bough left outside a door, of the stillness before a storm. These poems remind us that the samurai were not only men of steel, but also men of sensitivity, capable of seeing the delicate patterns of life, even as they prepared to face death. Can you imagine such a life? To rise each morning with the sound of horses stirring, to train until your arms ached with the weight of the bow, then to return home and watch the sunset with a cup of warm sake. What would you notice most? The strain of duty or the quiet pride of belonging to a tradition larger than yourself? As clans grew stronger, their warriors became more organized, more disciplined. The bond between lord and retainer deepened, and with it, the expectation of loyalty. A warrior's worth was measured not only by his skill, but by his reliability, his ability to stand firm even when others faltered. In return, the lord offered land, titles, and a share in his prestige. Step by step, the feudal bond hardened, giving rise to a society where the warrior stood at its very core. Still, danger was never far away. Bandits roamed the countryside. Rival clans jostled for territory. The central court in Kyoto remained brilliant but distant, its grasp on power slipping as real strength passed into the provinces. When disputes arose, they were not settled by decrees but by blades and arrows. The bow remained supreme, but already the curved sword, still shorter, less refined than the later katana, was finding its place at a warrior's side. It is in this time that the ethos of the samurai begins to take recognizable shape. Not yet codified into the Bushido we know, it nevertheless carried seeds of that philosophy: courage, loyalty, self-discipline, and the pursuit of honor. These ideals were not abstract. They were lived daily, tested in the clash of arms and the endurance of hardship. They were the invisible thread tying a warrior's life together. As the 12th century advances, these men of bow and horse stand ready to transform the destiny of Japan. The great clans, Minamoto and Taira, gather strength, each commanding vast networks of loyal retainers. Their rivalry will soon burst into the Genpei War, a conflict that will paint the land with fire and legend. But before that storm, there is this moment of balance, a world where the samurai ride across misty fields, arrows ready, banners fluttering in the wind. The horse snorts, the bow creaks, the arrow flies. In that single motion lives the essence of their dawn, the blending of strength and grace, of violence and beauty, of human will and divine favor. It is the way of the bow and horse, the path by which a class of warriors began their long, unforgettable journey through history. The sun hangs low over the rice fields, glinting off the flooded paddies where stalks sway gently in the breeze. The air smells of earth and water, of a harvest that will soon come, and in the distance, a wooden manor rises above the farmland. Within its walls, retainers bow before their lord, pledging service, while outside, peasants bend their backs beneath the sun. This is the rhythm of Japan in the age when loyalty and land became the twin pillars of samurai life. The warriors who once roamed as mounted archers, proud of their skill and individuality, now find themselves bound more tightly to the lords they serve. What began as scattered bonds of convenience hardens into the structure of feudalism. A warrior's worth is no longer only in his courage on the battlefield, but in his loyalty, tested not just in moments of glory, but in the daily demands of service and duty. Land was the currency of this loyalty. For centuries, the imperial court in Kyoto had granted estates, known as shuen, to noble families, monasteries, and favored retainers. These estates, often exempt from taxation, became the lifeblood of power. But as central control weakened, it was not the courtiers in silk who protected these lands. It was the samurai, and in return for their protection, lords granted them parcels of land to manage, or the income drawn from it. Thus, loyalty was written not on parchment alone, but etched into the soil itself. Picture a warrior receiving such a gift. He kneels before his lord, who hands him a document or a token marking his new estate. Outside, farmers continue their labor, unaware that their harvests will now sustain another household, another lineage. For the samurai, this grant is not merely wealth. It is security for his family, a legacy he can pass on to his sons. The bond between lord and retainer deepens, sealed not only by words, but by fields and rivers, by villages and harvests. Yet this system also bred complexity. Loyalties overlapped, obligations tangled. A warrior might serve one lord, but be tied through marriage or blood to another. In times of peace, these bonds held together uneasily. In times of conflict, they could pull apart like threads in a fraying garment. Betrayal was never far from loyalty, and loyalty itself could mean sacrifice beyond what one man could bear. Still, the ideal of service took root. Stories from this period emphasize warriors who gave their lives for their lords, who chose death over dishonor, who endured hardship with steadfast hearts. These tales laid the foundation for the later philosophy of Bushido. But in these centuries, the reality was often harsher, more uncertain. Samurai might fight bravely one season, only to be crushed by famine or driven from their lands the next. Loyalty was prized, but survival demanded flexibility. What would it have felt like to live within this web of duty and land? To know that your family's future depended not only on your skill with bow and sword, but on the shifting fortunes of your lord. Imagine the quiet tension in a warrior's home. The wife managing the household, aware that a lost battle could mean the loss of their estate. The children growing up under the weight of expectations. The warrior himself sharpening his arrows by lamplight, pondering whether his loyalty would bring reward or ruin. Daily life revolved around these obligations. A retainer might spend his mornings overseeing the collection of rice from peasants, ensuring that his lord's share was carefully stored. In the afternoons, he would train with his companions, practicing archery or horseback riding. In the evenings, he might sit with his family, listening to the wind rustling through the bamboo, knowing that tomorrow he might be summoned to ride out in his lord's defense. His life was not his own, but tied to the will of another. Yet there was pride in this bond. To serve a great lord was to share in his honor, to carry his banner into battle, to be remembered in songs and chronicles. The estate a warrior managed was not just soil and crops. It was proof of trust, of recognition. Land was stability in a world where power shifted like the seasons. This system of loyalty and land also reshaped society itself. Villages grew around manors, temples flourished under samurai patronage, and roads echoed with the movement of armed men. The imperial court remained distant, its authority diminished, but in the provinces, the samurai became the true power. Their presence was felt in every tax collected, every dispute settled, every harvest safeguarded. They were no longer just warriors on horseback. They were rulers in miniature, administrators of the land, protectors of communities. Of course, power invited conflict. As samurai families gained wealth and land, rivalries deepened. Estates became prizes to be won or seized, and disputes over inheritance could spark feuds that lasted generations. Brothers might find themselves on opposing sides, bound by loyalty to different lords. In such moments, the ideals of loyalty clashed with the realities of ambition and survival. Can you imagine the weight of such a choice? To ride into battle and see a familiar face across the field, a cousin perhaps, or even a brother, and to know that duty demanded steel be raised against him. Such were the human costs hidden beneath the grand stories of loyalty. Religion offered guidance in this tangled world. Many samurai turned to Buddhist teachings, finding comfort in the idea of impermanence, that life itself was fleeting, that death in service could be met with acceptance. Others clung to Shinto rituals, seeking protection from ancestral spirits and the kami who dwelled in forests and rivers. In shrines and temples, warriors prayed not only for victory, but for balance, for the strength to uphold their vows amid the shifting tides of fate. By the 12th century, the pattern was clear. The court in Kyoto had faded into ceremonial splendor, while true authority lay with those who held land through loyalty. The samurai stood at the heart of this transformation, their lives a living bridge between politics and soil, between sword and plough. And as the great clans expanded their networks of retainers, the stage was set for the conflicts that would define Japan's medieval age. The air grows heavy with anticipation. The Minamoto and the Taira, bound by vast webs of loyalty and land, prepare for confrontation. Their banners ripple in the wind, their retainers sharpen arrows, their lords weigh the price of ambition. Soon the Genpei War will erupt, tearing the land apart, testing loyalty to its limits. But for now, in this moment of quiet before the storm, we see the essence of the samurai's rise. Loyalty pledged with bowed heads, land granted with solemn ceremony, lives intertwined with duty and soil. It is the beginning of a pattern that will shape centuries. A world where every harvest, every oath, every arrow loosed from a bow carries within it the weight of loyalty and land. The air grows tense, like the stillness before thunder. Across Japan, whispers travel from village to village, from shrine to shrine. Two names, spoken with both awe and fear, echo through the valleys: Minamoto and Taira. Their rivalry has smouldered for decades, but now the embers catch the wind. The land braces for a war, that will reshape the destiny of Japan. The Genpei War. The story begins in the 12th century, when the court in Kyoto still gleams with elegance yet struggles to hold power. Behind the screens of painted silk, courtiers debate poetry and ceremony, while outside the palace walls, the strength of the sword determines reality. Two clans, both with roots deep in the imperial line, rise above all others. The Taira, led by Taira no Kiyomori, bask in the height of their influence. They control the court, command armies, and seem unassailable. The Minamoto, once crushed and humbled, linger in exile, their survivors scattered and subdued. But shadows lengthen, and history turns. Taira no Kiyomori is a figure of ambition and pride. His story is one of triumph, for he rose from warrior roots to dominate the imperial court itself. Imagine him striding through Kyoto, robes of crimson flowing, his presence commanding even among nobles of ancient pedigree. He marries his family into the imperial line, places his grandson upon the throne, and fills high offices with his kin. For a time, the Taira seemed destined to rule not only with swords, but with the seal of legitimacy. Yet in their very triumph lies the seed of resentment. For those excluded from power, for the Minamoto who remember their fallen brothers, the Taira's dominance feels like suffocation. The Minamoto, though scattered, are not extinguished. Minamoto no Yoritomo, exiled far from Kyoto, grows in quiet strength. From his base in Kamakura, a coastal region distant from the capital's glitter, he begins to gather allies. Provincial lords, discontented warriors, men eager to challenge Taira supremacy. In his calm determination lies a different kind of power, not the splendor of the court, but the rugged loyalty of the provinces. Imagine the preparations in these distant lands. Warriors polish their armor until it glints in the firelight. Horses are brushed, fed, and trained for long campaigns. Banners are stitched with clan emblems, ready to ripple in the wind of battle. At night, men sit around campfires, sharpening arrows, speaking in hushed tones about the coming storm. Some feel pride, others dread, but all know that the clash ahead will decide not just the fate of clans, but the very shape of Japan's future. The Genpei War, named for the characters Gen of Minamoto and Hei of Taira, begins in 1180. Its battles sweep across the land, from riverbanks to mountain passes, from the capital's gates to remote provinces. Unlike earlier skirmishes, this is no brief feud. It is a national struggle, pulling in lords, monks, peasants, and courtiers alike. The war carries moments of ceremony and chaos intertwined. On the battlefield, warriors still honor traditions, announcing their names, proclaiming their lineage, loosing arrows in ritual exchanges. Yet as the conflict deepens, the battles grow harsher, more desperate. The bow and horse remain central, but swords clash more often, and blood stains the soil in fields that once knew only the plough. One can almost hear the cries, the beat of war drums, the neighing of horses, the clash of steel. Smoke rises from burning villages. The scent of ash drifts on the wind. Families flee, clutching what little they can carry as armies sweep through the countryside. For the samurai, glory and death walk side by side. For common people, the war brings hunger, fear, and ruin. Within these shadows shine stories of individuals whose deeds are remembered across centuries. Tales tell of Minamoto no Yoshitsune, Yoritomo's half-brother, a commander of brilliance and daring. Small in stature but unmatched in strategy, Yoshitsune leads with courage that inspires men and terrifies foes. His maneuvers at battles such as Ichi no Tani, where he rides down a near impossible slope to strike the enemy from behind, become legends of ingenuity and audacity. The Taira too have their champions, proud warriors who fight with desperate valor to preserve their clan's supremacy. Yet as the years pass, the tide turns. The Minamoto, united under Yoritomo's leadership, grind down their foes. Step by step, the Taira are pushed back. Their hold on Kyoto loosens. Their power wanes. The war reaches its crescendo in 1185 at the Battle of Dan-no-Ura, fought upon the waters of the Shimonoseki Strait. Picture the scene. Fleets of ships, their sails taut in the wind, clash upon the waves. Arrows darken the sky, striking wood and flesh alike. The sea roars with the cries of men, the crash of ships, the rush of waves against hulls. Amid the chaos, loyalties shift. Allies defect, and the Taira find themselves betrayed. Their forces collapse, their ships scatter, and with them sinks their destiny. It is said that as the battle turned against them, members of the Taira clan chose death over capture. Among them was the young Emperor Antoku, just a child, carried into the sea by his grandmother. In that moment, the imperial regalia, sword, mirror, and jewel, the symbols of Japan's divine lineage, slipped beneath the waves. Whether myth or memory, the story lingers like a haunting melody, a reminder of the war's tragic weight. The Minamoto emerge victorious. Yoritomo claims power, establishing his base at Kamakura and laying the foundation for the first shogunate. A government led not by emperors, but by warriors. The court in Kyoto remains, its ceremonies and poetry undisturbed, but true authority has shifted. The samurai, once provincial enforcers, now rule the land, yet victory carries its own shadows. Within the Minamoto, rivalries simmer. Yoritomo, cautious and calculating, distrusts even his own brother Yoshitsune. Despite Yoshitsune's brilliance, he is hunted and forced into exile, where his story ends in betrayal and death. Even in triumph, the samurai learn that loyalty can fracture, that glory can invite suspicion, that power demands sacrifice. The Genpei War is remembered not only for its battles, but for the way it reshaped identity. The samurai emerge as Japan's true rulers, their way of life elevated, their loyalty bound to the shogun rather than the emperor. The ideals of courage, discipline, and service deepen, even as the realities of politics remind them that war is not only about valor, but about survival. Can you imagine standing on the shore after Dan-no-Ura, watching the tide carry away broken ships and bodies, hearing the gulls cry above the waves? Would you feel triumph or sorrow, or both at once? Such moments linger in the soul of a people, carried through generations in stories, songs, and silent remembrance. The shadows of the Genpei War stretch long. They mark the end of one age and the dawn of another, the age of the samurai, no longer provincial shadows, but the ruling force of Japan. Yet even as the Minamoto celebrate, new challenges gather on the horizon. The shogunate must balance its power, must govern a land still restless, must prove that the sword can guide not only the battlefield, but the realm itself. For now, the echoes of war fade into the sigh of the sea. The banners are furled, the bows unstrung, the horses led back to their stables. But the memory of loyalty, betrayal, and sacrifice remains, a lesson carved into the heart of a nation. The war is over. The echoes of arrows and steel drift into silence, leaving only the sigh of wind over the sea. The banners of the Minamoto ripple proudly, their victories secured, their rivals vanquished. Out of the shadows of conflict rises something new, something that will shape centuries. A government not ruled by emperors in silken halls, but by warriors in armor. The age of the Kamakura Shogunate has begun. In Kyoto, the emperor still sits upon the throne, cloaked in the sacred aura of divinity. Ceremonies continue, poetry contests are held, and the capital's gardens remain fragrant with blossoms. Yet beneath this veneer of tradition, power has shifted. Authority is no longer measured in imperial decrees, but in the commands of the shogun, the generalissimo, supreme leader of the samurai. And the first of these is Minamoto no Yoritomo. From his base in Kamakura, far from the court's refined splendor, Yoritomo begins to build a government rooted in discipline and military order. Picture Kamakura in those early years, nestled between mountains and sea. It is a fortress city, humble in comparison to Kyoto's grandeur, but strong in spirit. Wooden barracks line the roads, temples rise among pine groves, and warriors ride through its gates with banners streaming in the salt air. The city hums with energy, a new kind of capital shaped not by courtly elegance, but by the steady rhythm of command. The Kamakura Shogunate is more than a new seat of power. It is a reordering of society. For centuries, the emperor and his courtiers had claimed authority, but their grip was tenuous, their reach limited. Now the samurai take their place at the center. Yoritomo establishes the bakufu, literally the tent government, named for the field tents of military command. This government enforces law, collects taxes and manages disputes, all with the steel of the warrior at its back. Imagine a dispute between two provincial lords, each claiming a river valley as his own. In earlier times, they might have settled the matter with private skirmishes. Now they appeal to the shogunate, sending emissaries to Kamakura, where officials weigh evidence and render judgment. The authority of the shogun steadies the land, providing a structure that promises, if not peace, then at least order. For the samurai, this age brings new roles. No longer merely warriors, they become administrators, judges, and stewards of the land. Their loyalty to the shogun binds them in a network of obligation that stretches across Japan. Each estate is tied to the shogunate, each sword pledged not only to local lords, but to the greater authority in Kamakura. It is a web of loyalty, discipline, and governance that reshapes the fabric of daily life. Yet the Kamakura system is not without tension. The imperial court in Kyoto still exists, still claims sacred legitimacy. The shogunate cannot erase it, nor does it seek to, at least not directly. Instead, the two coexist in uneasy balance. The emperor as spiritual symbol, the shogun as practical ruler. One wields tradition, the other wields power. It is a delicate dance, fraught with potential conflict, but for a time it holds. What would it have felt like to walk the streets of Kamakura in these days? To hear the clang of blacksmiths forging armor, the chants of monks in temples, the bustle of markets where rice and fish were traded for tools and cloth. Compared to Kyoto's elegance, the city may have seemed rough, almost austere, yet alive with purpose. The samurai here were not cloistered in ritual. They lived close to the earth, their hands calloused not only from swords, but from the labor of managing estates and overseeing justice. Religion, too, flourished in this new age. Zen Buddhism, with its emphasis on discipline, meditation, and simplicity, found a natural home among the samurai. Warriors, hardened by battle and bound by duty, turned to Zen temples for guidance, seeking clarity amid the turmoil of power. Picture a samurai kneeling before a low wooden altar, the scent of incense curling upward, his sword laid at his side. In stillness, he breathes, letting go of the noise of the world, finding in silence a mirror of his own resolve. At the same time, Pure Land Buddhism spread among common people, offering hope through devotion and prayer. Temples rang with chants of the Nembutsu, the name of Amida Buddha, promising rebirth in a land of peace. In this age of shifting authority, religion gave both warriors and villagers alike a sense of stability, a place to rest their weary hearts. Yet beneath the order of Kamakura, shadows remained. The Minamoto line itself was fragile. Yoritomo, wary of rivals, ruled with caution and suspicion. His own brother, Yoshitsune, hero of the Genpei War, fell victim to his mistrust, hunted and slain despite his brilliance. Power demanded vigilance, and even family bonds could be sacrificed to maintain control. When Yoritomo died in 1199, his descendants proved too weak to hold the shogunate's reins. Into this void stepped the Hojo family, Yoritomo's in-laws. Clever and calculating, they assumed the role of regents, ruling in the name of child shoguns while keeping true authority in their own hands. The Hojo regency would guide the shogunate for over a century, stabilizing the government, but also sowing seeds of resentment. Samurai loyal to other families often chafed under their dominance, waiting for chances to reclaim influence. Even so, the Kamakura Shogunate endured, balancing power between lords, temples, and the court. For the first time in Japanese history, a warrior government proved that the sword could sustain not only conquest, but administration. Villages thrived under their protection, trade routes grew busier, and the islands of Japan settled into a rhythm under the watch of the Bakufu. Still, peace was always fragile. Beyond the seas, new dangers stirred. Word began to spread of a vast empire rising in the west, its riders sweeping across Asia with fire and steel. The Mongols, fierce and relentless, would soon turn their gaze toward Japan. The samurai, disciplined though they were, had never faced such a storm. But for now, in the early days of Kamakura, there is a sense of transformation. The samurai, once provincial fighters, now rule as governors of the land. Their banners no longer fly only in battle, but in halls of judgment, in markets, in temples. Their way of life is not simply survival, but governance, order, and responsibility. Can you imagine standing on the shore near Kamakura, looking out at the vast Pacific? Behind you, the city stirs with the energy of a new government. Before you, the sea stretches endless, holding secrets and threats beyond the horizon. Would you feel pride in this new order, or unease at the challenges yet unseen? Perhaps both, for the story of the samurai has always been a blend of triumph and uncertainty. The Kamakura Shogunate stands as the first great warrior government, a turning point where swords gave shape to society itself. And though its legacy would one day falter, for now it shines like a beacon, a symbol that the age of the samurai had truly begun. The sea has always been a barrier and a blessing for Japan. It separates the islands from the vast continent beyond, shaping a people who live with tides and storms, with fishing boats and rice terraces by the shore. For centuries, the ocean protected Japan from foreign armies, wrapping the land in a cocoon of waves. But in the 13th century, whispers came from the west of a power so immense it seemed to swallow kingdoms whole. The Mongols. The Mongol Empire, forged by Genghis Khan and carried forward by his descendants, stretched across Asia. From the deserts of Central Asia to the rivers of China, their banners flew. In the time of Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis, the empire sought to extend its reach even further, and Japan, lying across the sea from newly conquered Korea, caught his eye. For the first time in its history, the islands faced invasion not from within, but from beyond. Picture the anxiety in Kamakura as word of the Mongols spread. The samurai had fought rival clans, had tested loyalty and courage against fellow Japanese, but never had they confronted a force from another world. The Mongols fought differently. They used thunderous volleys of arrows, coordinated formations, and strange weapons like exploding bombs that burst with smoke and fire. Against such tactics, the traditional ways of the bow and horse seemed suddenly uncertain. In 1274, the first storm arrived. Mongol fleets sailed from Korea, carrying tens of thousands of men. Mongols, Chinese, and Korean conscripts. Imagine the sight from the shore of Kyushu, black silhouettes of ships blotting the horizon, sails taut against the wind, drums echoing across the waves. Villagers fled inland, their voices mingling with the crash of surf. Samurai gathered their armor, mounted their horses, and rode to meet the invaders. The battle was fierce. On the beaches of Hakata Bay, samurai charged with bows and swords, calling out their names in the old tradition, eager for single combat. But the Mongols did not answer with the expected ritual. Instead, they advanced in tight ranks, shields interlocked, arrows loosed in coordinated storms. Thunder crashes from gunpowder bombs startled horses, filling the air with smoke and fire. For the samurai, it was a bewildering clash. Their world of duels and honor meeting the relentless efficiency of a global empire. And yet, they held. Though outnumbered and shaken by the strange tactics, the defenders pressed on. Battles raged through the day, neither side fully victorious. Then, as night fell, the Mongols withdrew to their ships, intending to renew the assault. But fate intervened. A sudden storm swept across the sea, battering the invaders' fleet. Ships cracked against rocks, men were tossed into the waves, and the survivors retreated in disarray. For Japan, the threat had passed, but only for a time. Kublai Khan was not finished. Angered by the setback, he ordered a second invasion, even greater than the first. In 1281, the largest fleet the world had yet seen set sail. Hundreds upon hundreds of ships, carrying perhaps 140,000 men. Once again, the horizon darkened with sails. Once again, the shores of Kyushu braced for battle. The samurai prepared with greater determination. Fortifications were built along Hakata Bay, walls of stone rising against the sea, manned by warriors ready to repel the enemy. Day after day, clashes erupted as Mongol ships approached, as arrows flew, as men fell. The fighting was relentless, and for weeks it seemed as though Japan might finally succumb to the storm. But then came another storm, this one greater than the first. A typhoon swept down upon the Mongol fleet, fierce winds lashing the sea, waves pounding ship against ship. Vessels splintered, sailors and soldiers alike thrown into the churning water. Entire squadrons vanished beneath the storm. When the tempest cleared, the invasion was shattered. Japan remained free. The people called the storm the kamikaze, the divine wind. To them, it was more than chance. It was proof that the gods themselves had protected the islands, that Japan was shielded by a sacred force. The legend of the kamikaze would echo across centuries, a story of salvation and destiny. But for the samurai, the invasions left deeper marks. They had fought valiantly, yet their way of life was tested as never before. The cost of preparing defences, of manning walls, of holding the line, was immense. Rewards were harder to grant, for the Mongol invaders left no lands to distribute, no estates to seize. Warriors who had risked their lives returned home with little more than pride. Discontent simmered, loyalty strained. The Hojo Regency, which guided the shogunate, struggled to balance duty and reward. Still, the memory of the invasions bound the samurai together in pride. They had stood against the greatest empire the world had ever known and survived. Their walls at Hakata stood as symbols of endurance. Their prayers at shrines echoed with gratitude. And in the quiet after the storm, life resumed. Rice planted in paddies, children playing by rivers, monks chanting in temples. Yet always, in the back of the mind, lingered the memory of ships on the horizon and the roar of divine winds. Can you imagine standing on that beach after the storm? The sand littered with wreckage, broken masts and splintered hulls washed ashore. The cries of gulls overhead, the scent of salt and seaweed heavy in the air. Would you feel relief, awe, a trembling awareness that life and death had danced so closely together, and that survival had come not only from courage, but from forces beyond human hands? The storms of the Mongols changed Japan in ways both seen and unseen. They reinforced the sense of uniqueness, of divine protection. They tested the bonds of loyalty and revealed the limits of the feudal system. They etched into the samurai spirit a lesson that survival required not only valor, but preparation, unity, and perhaps the grace of the gods. As the 14th century approached, the Mongol fleets were gone, but the samurai faced new storms of their own making. Internal rivalries, shifting loyalties, and the strains of rule would challenge the shogunate from within. The divine wind had saved Japan from external conquest. But could the samurai weather the tempests rising in their own hearts and halls? For now, the sea is calm again. The waves lap gently at Hakata Bay, erasing footprints and blood alike. The divine wind has passed, leaving behind both memory and myth. And in the stillness, the samurai return to their horses, their bows, their swords, ready, though perhaps uncertain, for the storms yet to come. The storms of the Mongols had passed, and the shores of Japan lay quiet once more. The wreckage of broken fleets had long since rotted into the sea, and villages rebuilt what had been lost. For a time, there was pride, even triumph, in the knowledge that Japan had stood against the greatest empire the world had ever known. But beneath that pride, fractures began to spread. The Kamakura Shogunate, once strong and steady, found itself strained by debts, disputes, and the heavy burden of governance. The winds that had saved Japan now gave way to the quieter storms of discontent. The Mongol invasions had cost dearly. Samurai across the land had fought with courage, building fortifications, patrolling coasts, and risking their lives against overwhelming odds. Yet, when the dust settled, there was little to show for it. Victorious wars usually brought rewards, captured lands, seized wealth, and new estates to grant loyal warriors. But the Mongols had left no conquered territory behind. The warriors returned to their homes expecting recognition, only to find that the treasury was empty. The Hojo regents who ruled in Kamakura could not satisfy their retainers' demands. What had once been a bond of loyalty began to strain. Imagine the bitterness in the hearthside conversations of samurai households. A warrior recalls the long nights on the walls of Hakata Bay, the battles fought against strange weapons, the prayers whispered in fear of the enemy fleet. He looks at his children, his rice fields, his modest home, unchanged, unrewarded, and wonders if his service meant anything at all. The unspoken resentment spreads like cracks in stone, subtle at first, then widening with each passing year. At the same time, the structure of power in Japan grew more tangled. The emperor still sat in Kyoto, a figure of ritual and poetry, but ambition stirred even within the imperial line. In 1331, Emperor Go-Daigo sought to reclaim authority from the shogunate. His dream was to restore imperial power, to end the centuries of warrior rule, and to place the court once again at the heart of the nation. His determination sparked what became known as the Kenmu Restoration, a brief, turbulent attempt to reassert imperial control. Can you picture Kyoto in those days? The lantern-lit palaces of the emperor, filled with courtiers whispering of revival and destiny, while beyond the city gates, samurai loyal to Kamakura rode to suppress the dream. The conflict revealed just how fragile the balance of power had become. For generations, the shogunate and the court had coexisted uneasily, but now the old rivalry flared into open struggle. In this upheaval, new figures rose to prominence. Among them was Ashikaga Takauji, a general who at first fought for the Kamakura Shogunate, but soon turned against it. His betrayal marked the beginning of the shogunate's downfall. With shifting loyalties and rival armies clashing, the Hojo regents found themselves overwhelmed. In 1333, Kamakura fell. The city that had stood as the fortress of samurai government was consumed by flames, its power broken. For a moment, Emperor Go-Daigo's vision seemed triumphant. The Kenmu Restoration promised a return to imperial rule, a revival of the old order. But reality proved harsher. The samurai who had fought for the emperor expected reward, recognition, and land, just as they always had. Instead, many found themselves ignored or overlooked, as Go-Daigo favoured courtly allies over warriors. The discontent that had fractured Kamakura now spread into the emperor's camp. The dream of restoration unravelled quickly. Ashikaga Takauji, once the emperor's champion, turned against him. In 1336, Takauji established himself as shogun, founding the Ashikaga Shogunate, also called the Muromachi Shogunate, after the district in Kyoto, where it was based. Once again, power returned to the samurai, but now the fractures ran deeper. What was life like for the samurai in this time of fading order? Imagine a warrior caught between loyalties, one day fighting for the emperor, the next for the shogunate, unsure which cause would endure. Families split, provinces divided, oaths broken and remade. The ideals of loyalty, so carefully nurtured in earlier centuries, were tested to breaking point. To survive, a warrior often had to choose pragmatism over honor, aligning with whichever side promised stability. And yet, even in chaos, the rhythms of daily life continued. Fields were planted, children were raised, poems were written. A samurai might ride to battle in the morning and return at night to sit quietly in his garden, listening to the wind in the bamboo. In these small moments, there was continuity, a reminder that life carried on despite the fractures of politics and power. Religion also provided solace in uncertain times. Zen Buddhism, with its quiet emphasis on meditation and simplicity, grew ever more influential. Warriors found in its teachings a mirror of their own discipline, the calm mind in the midst of turmoil, the focus on the present moment, the acceptance of impermanence. Picture a warrior seated in a temple hall, incense drifting upward, his armor resting nearby. He breathes slowly, letting go of ambition and fear, finding in stillness a refuge from the storms of the world. But still the storms raged outside. The fall of Kamakura had not brought peace, but deeper division. The Ashikaga Shogunate, though established, faced constant challenges. Two imperial lines, the northern court backed by the shogunate and the southern court loyal to Go-Daigo's heirs, competed for legitimacy in what became known as the era of the northern and southern courts. For decades, battles flared across the land, samurai choosing sides, villages caught in the crossfire. The fading order of Kamakura had given way not to unity, but to fragmentation. Japan entered a period where loyalty was fractured, authority contested, and violence a constant shadow. The samurai, once rising in proud discipline, now found themselves instruments of shifting factions, their honor tested, their stability uncertain. Can you imagine the feeling of living in such an age? To never know if the banner flying one season would still command loyalty the next. To pledge your life to a cause, only to watch it crumble in the dust of betrayal. The uncertainty was heavy, like a storm cloud that never fully lifted. And yet, within it, the samurai endured, adapting, surviving, and preparing for the next turn of fate. The Kamakura Shogunate had been the first great experiment in warrior rule. Its fall marked the end of an age of stability and the beginning of an era of turbulence that would stretch on for centuries. The fractures it left behind would not heal quickly. Instead, they would widen, drawing Japan into cycles of conflict that shaped the samurai spirit in both strength and sorrow. For now the land lies divided, its future uncertain. The fires of Kamakura still smoulder. The banners of new powers rise and fall, and the people watch the horizon with wary eyes. The fading order has passed, and in its place comes a world of shadows and strife. A world that will soon be known as the Age of Warring States. The land lies restless. The old order of Kamakura has faded, and the new Ashikaga Shogunate, though seated in Kyoto, struggles to hold the nation together. Power drifts like mist across the valleys, sometimes gathered in one hand, sometimes slipping away. By the 15th century, that mist thickens into storm. Castles rise on hilltops, banners spread across the countryside, and Japan enters an age that will last for more than a century. The Sengoku Jidai, the age of warring states. Imagine traveling through the provinces during this time. Villages lie in cautious quiet, their people wary of marching armies. Smoke sometimes curls on the horizon where a manor has been burned, while messengers ride along rough roads carrying urgent news of shifting alliances. In every direction, daimyo, great warlords, strengthen their power. Each commands samurai and soldiers. Each dreams of expanding his domain. The emperor still sits in Kyoto, but his authority is more ceremonial than real. The Ashikaga Shogunate endures, but its grip is weak, its orders often ignored. The true power rests with the daimyo, and they will not share it easily. The Sengoku period begins in earnest with the Onin War of 1467. What started as a dispute over succession to the shogunate erupts into a conflict that consumes Kyoto and radiates outward. For 10 long years, the capital burns, its streets choked with fighting. Mansions of noble families collapse into ash, and temples once filled with chants echo instead with the cries of battle. When the smoke clears, the shogunate is but a shadow, and the land fractures into countless rival domains. In this fractured world, loyalty becomes a fragile thread. Samurai swear oaths to their daimyo, but daimyo themselves rise and fall with dizzying speed. A warrior may one year serve one master, and the next year another, as alliances crumble and rivalries flare. The bonds of loyalty remain an ideal, yet the harsh reality of survival often bends them. Still, honor retains its hold. Many samurai choose death over betrayal. Their stories pass down as examples of devotion even in an age of shifting sands. Picture a battlefield in the Sengoku years. The morning mist clings to the fields, drums thunder in the distance, and ranks of soldiers stand ready. Unlike earlier battles of mounted archers and dueling champions, the armies of this age are vast, numbering in the tens of thousands. Foot soldiers march with spears, archers loose volleys in unison, and banners ripple in the wind, each emblazoned with the crest of its lord. Strategy grows more complex. Commanders must think not only of valor, but of formations, supply lines, and siegecraft. It is in this age that castles rise as symbols of power. No longer just wooden forts or hilltop stockades. These new fortresses of stone and timber dominate landscapes. Moats encircle them. Gates bristle with defenses. Towers loom above valleys. Within their walls, daimyo gather their retainers, manage their lands, and prepare for war. Castles become both centers of military strength and symbols of stability, places where farmers bring tribute, where artisans craft armor and weapons, where lords hold court. For the common people, life is both harsh and adaptive. Farmers labor in fields that may one day be trampled by marching armies. Women manage households in the absence of men drawn into war. Children grow up in the shadow of conflict, yet still laugh, play, and dream beneath the same cherry blossoms that bloom each spring. In villages, Buddhist temples and Shinto shrines offer solace, their bells ringing across valleys as reminders of continuity in a time of chaos. Can you imagine standing within a castle keep, looking out over a province divided by rivers and mountains, to know that every village, every bridge, every rice field is both a resource and a vulnerability? The daimyo who ruled in this era bore immense responsibility to protect their lands, to reward their retainers, to plan for wars that could come at any season. Theirs was a life of vigilance, ambition, and constant calculation. The Sengoku age also brought new opportunities for those bold enough to seize them. Men of humble origin could rise through skill and bravery, earning favor from powerful lords. Merchants, though once low in status, found new influence as trade routes expanded, supplying armies with weapons, armor, and provisions. Even pirates along the coasts carved out power, controlling sea lanes and raiding villages. It was an age of risk, but also of mobility, where fortune could be remade with courage and cunning. Religion, too, played its role in these unsettled years. Some Buddhist temples amassed their own armies, becoming both sanctuaries and centers of resistance. The Iko-Iki, leagues of warrior monks and peasants inspired by Pure Land Buddhism, rose in defiance of samurai lords, seizing territories and governing them in the name of faith. For samurai, this was both a threat and a challenge, as they faced enemies who fought not for land, but for belief. The Sengoku years stretched on, decade after decade, shaping generations. Children born in its earliest battles grew old without ever knowing lasting peace. And yet, within the turbulence, seeds of unification were being planted. Among the daimyo, some proved more cunning, more ambitious, more determined than others. Names like Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa Ieyasu would one day rise, but for now, they were yet to emerge from the shadows of chaos. In this long night of war, the samurai's identity sharpened. Their loyalty was tested, their skills refined, their philosophy deepened. They lived not in the certainty of peace, but in the rhythm of conflict, where each dawn might bring a summons to battle, and each dusk might mark the loss of friend or foe. And yet, they endured. Can you feel the tension of that time? The weight of armor on your shoulders, the smell of smoke on the horizon, the sound of distant horns signaling an enemy's approach. Would you cling to loyalty or bend with the winds of survival? These were the questions every samurai faced in the age of warring states. The Sengoku era was chaos, but within chaos lay the possibility of change. The land was fractured, yet it was from these fractures that new strength would rise. The storms of war would continue, but out of them would come leaders bold enough to dream of unifying the land, to end the cycle of fire and ash. For now, Japan remained divided, each province a world unto itself, each daimyo a lord of uncertain fate. The banners of war rippled on countless fields, the cries of soldiers mingled with the tolling of temple bells, and the samurai carried on, guardians and rivals, dreamers and survivors, all bound within the endless dance of the age of warring states. The Sengoku age is a time of endless strife, but also of transformation. The battlefields of Japan, once dominated by the bow and horse, now echo with new sounds. The boom of arquebusiers, the crackle of fire against stone, the steady march of armies trained not only for valor, but for discipline. It is an age when castles rise like mountains of timber and stone, and when the arrival of foreign ships carries weapons that will change the course of war forever. Picture the landscape of 16th century Japan. Valleys dotted with farmhouses, rivers winding like silver threads, mountains rising with their evergreen crowns. But now, atop ridges and hills, fortresses loom. These are not the simple wooden stockades of earlier centuries. They are massive strongholds of stone, surrounded by wide moats and soaring walls. Keep towers, called tenshu, rise above them, symbols of both defense and prestige. To see one of these castles gleaming in the morning light is to glimpse the ambition of a daimyo who seeks not only survival, but dominance. The rise of castles reflects the new scale of warfare. Battles are no longer the ritualized duels of mounted archers, but sprawling conflicts involving tens of thousands. Armies march in disciplined ranks, their movements directed by signal flags, drums, and conch shells. Siegecraft becomes a central art. Ladders, battering rams, and catapults are deployed. Tunnels are dug beneath walls. Flaming arrows and stones rain down from towers. Castles are both fortresses and administrative centres, anchoring power in the provinces and offering visible proof of a lord's strength. Daily life within these castles is vibrant and complex. Inside the walls, samurai and their families dwell, artisans labour at their crafts, and retainers manage the affairs of the domain. Kitchens bustle with activity, preparing meals for hundreds of mouths. Armories clang with the work of blacksmiths forging swords, spearheads, and now barrels for new weapons. Children play in courtyards where banners ripple overhead, growing up in the shadow of stone walls that promise safety, yet whisper of the wars outside. And it is in this time that foreign winds arrive. In 1543, a Portuguese ship, blown off course, lands on the shores of Tanegashima, a small island in southern Japan. With the Portuguese come strange tools, firearms, unlike anything the Japanese have seen. The matchlock arquebus, clumsy yet deadly, sparks fascination. The daimyo who acquire them first see immediately their potential. In the hands of disciplined troops, these weapons can pierce armor, shatter cavalry charges, and transform the very rhythm of war. Imagine the first demonstration, a flash of fire, a burst of smoke, a thunderous crack that echoes across the hills. A target, once thought safe behind distance, falls in an instant. The samurai, trained for generations to master bow and sword, watch with awe and unease. Some dismiss the weapons as dishonorable, lacking the grace of archery. Others see in them the future, a tool too powerful to ignore. Within years, Japanese smiths adapt and refine the design. Tanegashima becomes synonymous with the matchlock, as workshops across the islands produce firearms in growing numbers. Daimyo compete to arm their soldiers, training peasant footmen as gunners. The old balance between mounted archers and foot soldiers begins to shift. Armies once measured in hundreds of horsemen now swell with ranks of ashigaru. Common soldiers drilled to fire in volleys, their weapons synchronized like the beat of a drum. The most famous demonstration of this new art comes in 1575 at the Battle of Nagashino. Oda Nobunaga, one of the rising figures of the age, deploys thousands of arquebusiers against the cavalry of the Takeda clan. Behind wooden stockades, his gunners fire in rotating volleys, breaking charge after charge. The field that once might have been ruled by the bow is now dominated by the thunder of firearms. In that moment, the samurai world changes forever. Yet firearms do not erase the old ways entirely. The sword remains a symbol of honor, the bow still practiced in ceremony, the horse still valued for speed and status. But on the battlefield, the matchlock is a reality none can ignore. Strategy evolves to accommodate it. Castles are designed with walls angled to deflect shot, and the very nature of bravery is redefined. To stand in the face of a storm of bullets is as honorable as to meet an enemy blade to blade. Religion and culture, too, adapt to these changes. The Jesuit missionaries who accompany the Portuguese introduce Christianity, which finds converts among both commoners and daimyo. Churches rise near castles, bells tolling in valleys where Buddhist chants once held sway alone. For some warlords, alliances with Europeans bring not only firearms, but trade, wealth, and exotic goods, silk, wine, clocks, and maps of distant lands. The Sengoku world, though fractured, is no longer isolated. It is a crossroads of ambition, faith, and technology. Can you imagine standing on a castle wall at night, looking down at the glow of campfires stretching across the valley floor? To know that at dawn drums will sound, matchlocks will thunder, and thousands will move at the signal of banners. Would you feel awe at the scale of it all, or fear at the forces now unleashed by powder and steel? Perhaps both, for such was the reality of the time. The rise of castles and firearms also deepens the bonds between lord and retainer. Daimyo reward their samurai not only with land, but with the honor of command, with the trust to lead men in this new style of war. Yet loyalty is still fragile. Betrayal remains a constant shadow. A retainer who feels overlooked may turn his sword against his master, seeking fortune elsewhere. Castles that today fly one banner may tomorrow fall to another, their walls blackened by fire, their gates forced open by cannon and flame. Still, within this turbulence lies a drive toward unity. The tools of destruction, castles to defend, firearms to conquer, also create conditions where the strongest leaders can rise above rivals. The Sengoku period, once an endless whirl of fragmented power, begins to narrow toward a struggle between fewer, greater figures. Out of the smoke and thunder, three men will emerge: Nobunaga, Hideyoshi, and Ieyasu, each in his own way, carrying the dream of a unified Japan. For now, though, the world is still fractured. The valleys still echo with gunfire. The castles still gleam on every hill. The age of warring states has not yet run its course. But in the crack of the arquebus and the shadow of stone towers, we see the future drawing near. A future where the samurai must adapt or be swept away by the march of change. The land of Japan has burned for generations. Villages rebuilt only to fall again. Castles rose and crumbled, and samurai lived by the rhythm of war. Yet amid the endless strife of the Sengoku age, three figures step forward, each with the vision and strength to bend the fractured land toward unity. Their names would echo through history: Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa Ieyasu. Together, though not without conflict, they carried Japan from chaos toward a dream of order. The first of these was Oda Nobunaga, a daimyo of Owari province. In his youth, he was known for wild behavior, dressing oddly, behaving without the stiff formality expected of a lord. Many dismissed him as foolish, unworthy of command. But within him burned a fire unlike any other. Nobunaga was ruthless, brilliant, and utterly determined. Where others clung to tradition, he embraced change. Where others sought stability, he sought conquest. Imagine Nobunaga in the 1560s, standing on the field of Okehazama. His forces are outnumbered, his enemies confident. Yet with cunning and daring, he leads a surprise attack through a sudden thunderstorm, catching his rival Imagawa Yoshimoto off guard. The enemy falls, and Nobunaga's reputation soars. From that day forward, he is no longer seen as a reckless youth, but as a leader with destiny at his side. Nobunaga's genius lay not only in battle, but in vision. He embraced the new firearms, training his armies in disciplined volleys that shattered cavalry charges. He built alliances when useful and broke them when they no longer served. His ambition was vast, nothing less than the unification of Japan under his banner. His march toward that goal was swift and merciless. Castles fell before him, rivals were crushed, and Kyoto itself came under his control. But Nobunaga was more than a warrior. He encouraged trade, welcoming merchants and foreign influence. He allowed Christian missionaries to spread their faith, not out of devotion, but out of practicality, using them to counter the power of Buddhist monasteries that resisted his rule. He rebuilt Kyoto's streets, fostering a city that could shine once again after centuries of turmoil. To walk through his domain was to feel both the sharp edge of his ambition and the stirrings of a new order. Yet Nobunaga's story ended not on the battlefield, but in betrayal. In 1582, one of his own generals, Akechi Mitsuhide, turned against him. At Honnoji Temple in Kyoto, Nobunaga was surrounded. Realizing escape was impossible, he chose death over capture, ending his life in flames. The dream of unification seemed to falter, Yet his work was not in vain, for into the void stepped his retainer, a man of humble birth, who would achieve what Nobunaga began. Toyotomi Hideyoshi was born the son of a peasant, a man who rose not through noble lineage, but through sheer brilliance and adaptability. As a boy, he was mocked, called monkey for his appearance. Yet through loyalty and cunning, he earned Nobunaga's trust, rising from sandal-bearer to general. After Nobunaga's death, Hideyoshi moved swiftly, avenging his master and consolidating power. Within years, he became the true ruler of Japan. Hideyoshi's genius lay in diplomacy as much as in war. Where Nobunaga crushed opposition with iron, Hideyoshi often persuaded rivals to submit through negotiation, gifts, and marriages. He brought daimyo under his control, redistributing land to secure loyalty. He carried out surveys of land and population, strengthening the foundations of governance. For the first time in centuries, Japan approached true unity. Imagine standing in Osaka Castle, Hideyoshi's great fortress. Its massive stone walls rise from the plain, its towers gleam above the city, its moats glisten under the sun. Within its halls, lords from across Japan bow before Hideyoshi, pledging allegiance. The dream that had once seemed impossible, a land united under one rule, now feels within reach. Yet Hideyoshi, like Nobunaga, carried ambitions beyond the ordinary. With Japan unified, he turned his gaze outward. In the 1590s, he launched invasions of Korea, hoping to extend his power into China itself. Vast armies crossed the sea, but the campaigns proved disastrous. Supply lines faltered, resistance stiffened, and after years of costly war, the armies withdrew. The invasions strained Japan's resources and left scars that would last generations. Still, Hideyoshi's legacy at home was profound. He established laws that reshaped society, forbidding peasants from bearing arms, separating farmers from warriors, solidifying the social order that defined the samurai class. No longer could men rise from fields to castles as he had. The boundaries were fixed. The samurai would remain warriors, the peasants farmers, the merchants traders. Hideyoshi had risen from humble origins, but he ensured no one else could follow his path. In 1598, Hideyoshi died, leaving behind a young son as heir. The unity he built was fragile, held together by his force of will. Without him, rivalries resurfaced. The stage was set for the rise of the third great figure, Tokugawa Ieyasu. Ieyasu had long walked a careful path. A contemporary of Nobunaga and Hideyoshi, he had survived by patience and pragmatism. Where Nobunaga burned bright and Hideyoshi dazzled with charm, Ieyasu endured with caution. He built alliances, bided his time, and waited for the moment when the land would be ready for his rule. That moment came in 1600 at the Battle of Sekigahara. The armies of Japan gathered in a clash that would decide the nation's future. Imagine the valley filled with tens of thousands of soldiers, banners stretching as far as the eye could see. The morning mist lifted to reveal lines of troops poised for battle. The clash was immense, the thunder of arquebusiers, the roar of voices, the charge of cavalry. Through cunning and betrayal, Ieyasu emerged victorious. With Sekigahara, the dream of unification was finally secured. Ieyasu would go on to establish the Tokugawa Shogunate, ushering in an age of peace that would last for more than 2 centuries. The fires of Sengoku chaos were extinguished, replaced by order, structure, and control. Can you imagine the relief of living through those years of transition? To be a farmer who had known only war, suddenly planting rice without fear of armies trampling the fields. To be a child who grew up not with the sound of drums and matchlocks, but with the quiet rhythm of festivals and temple bells. The dream of unification, once carried by three extraordinary men, became the daily reality of millions. Nobunaga, Hideyoshi, and Ieyasu, each so different, each so flawed, yet together they transformed Japan. One burned a path with ruthless ambition, one charmed and persuaded, rising from the lowest ranks to the highest. One endured, patient as stone, until the land finally fell into his hands. Their stories are not only tales of conquest, but of vision, resilience, and the dream of a peace that had eluded the islands for centuries. The Sengoku age was ending. The swords were sheathed, the castles no longer burned, and for the first time in generations, the people of Japan could breathe in a peace that felt lasting. Yet peace would bring its own transformations, reshaping the very identity of the samurai who had fought so long to win it. The smoke of Sekigahara drifts away, and with it the chaos of a century. The banners are furled, the battlefields emptied, and Japan exhales after generations of war. From the blood-soaked valleys rises something rare and precious: stability. Tokugawa Ieyasu, patient and deliberate, claims victory not only on the field but in the hearts of a weary nation. In 1603, the emperor grants him the title of shogun, and the Tokugawa Shogunate begins. For the first time in living memory, Japan moves toward an era not of fire, but of peace. Imagine the capital of Edo, the city that will one day become Tokyo. At the dawn of the Tokugawa era, it is a place of marshes and rivers transformed by Ieyasu's vision. Moats are dug, bridges rise, streets laid out in orderly fashion. The great Edo castle towers over the city, its walls strong, its gates imposing. Around it, towns spring to life, bustling with artisans, merchants and common folk. Day by day, the city grows, its rhythm steady, its pulse calm. From this base, the Tokugawa Shogunate governs a land finally drawn into lasting order. The Tokugawa system is ingenious in its balance. Daimyo, the lords who once fought endlessly for power, are bound by strict rules. Their lands remain, but their freedom is curbed. The policy of sankin kotai, or alternate attendance, requires them to spend every other year in Edo, their families kept there as hostages of loyalty. Imagine the long processions of daimyo travelling along the Tokaido Road, hundreds of retainers in colourful robes, horses clopping, banners fluttering as they march toward Edo in solemn display. These journeys bind the lords to the shogun, draining their resources while weaving the nation together through roads, inns, and commerce. For the samurai, this new age brings transformation. They are no longer constantly called to battle, no longer living by the bow and matchlock. Instead, they become administrators, scholars, and stewards. Their swords still hang at their sides, symbols of their station, but their daily duties shift toward managing estates, enforcing law, and serving their lords in courts rather than fields. The martial edge softens into a role of guardianship, and with it the meaning of being samurai begins to change. Can you imagine the adjustment this required? For generations, a warrior's worth was measured in valor, in scars, in the clash of steel. Now, in the quiet halls of castles, samurai copy records, oversee taxation, and settle disputes among farmers. Some embrace the stability, finding pride in governance. Others chafe at the stillness, longing for the fire of the battlefield. The sword remains their symbol, but its edge gleams more often in ceremony than in combat. Daily life in the Tokugawa Peace takes on a gentler rhythm. In castle towns across Japan, markets flourish. Merchants sell silks, ceramics, rice, and tea. Streets fill with the scent of grilled fish and miso soup, the chatter of children, the calls of vendors. Samurai walk in pairs, their top knots neat, their robes crisp, their swords at their sides. Farmers till fields with confidence, no longer fearing armies trampling their crops. Travellers move along the great highways, stopping at inns where lanterns glow warmly at night. Sake is poured, and songs drift across the tatami mats. The Tokugawa Shogunate also regulates class divisions with careful precision. Society is ordered into 4 main tiers: samurai at the top, followed by farmers, artisans, and merchants. Below them live outcasts, whose roles in leatherwork or burials mark them as untouchable. Within this hierarchy, the samurai maintain their prestige, but the merchants, though low in status, quietly gather wealth through trade. Over time, this imbalance between rank and riches will sow its own tensions, but for now, the order holds. Religion and philosophy flourish in this long peace. Neo-Confucianism, with its emphasis on hierarchy, loyalty, and duty, becomes the guiding principle of governance. Temples and shrines remain central, offering both spiritual guidance and social gathering places. Zen gardens, with their raked gravel and carefully placed stones, mirror the stillness of the age. Poetry blossoms, painting words across paper like brushstrokes of calm reflection. Kabuki theatres open their doors, entertaining townsfolk with colourful dramas of love and intrigue. The arts, once overshadowed by war, bloom in the shelter of stability. And yet, even in peace, the samurai identity must be preserved. To keep their discipline sharp, schools of swordsmanship and martial arts flourish. Dojos echo with the clack of wooden practice swords, the measured steps of kata, the shouts of determination. Archery remains a ritual art, performed in temples and shrines, the arrow released as both offering and discipline. Though few battles are fought, the warrior spirit is kept alive through training, ritual, and the quiet pride of readiness. Can you imagine standing in Edo's bustling streets during this time, the air filled with the aroma of chestnuts roasting, the laughter of children chasing each other through narrow alleys, the solemn stride of a samurai passing by, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of his sword? To live in such a time was to feel the weight of tradition and the comfort of order, a world where the fear of war had finally receded into memory. The Tokugawa Shogunate also sought to protect this peace by limiting contact with the outside world. In the 1630s, the policy of sakoku, or closed country, was established. Foreign trade was restricted mainly to the Dutch and Chinese at Nagasaki, while Christianity, once encouraged by Nobunaga, was suppressed with severity. Japan turned inward, focusing on its own stability, its own traditions. For more than 2 centuries, the outside world remained a distant horizon, known only through filtered glimpses of goods and news that trickled through Nagasaki's port. For the samurai, this isolation reinforced their role as guardians of an inward-facing society. Their identity grew increasingly tied to ritual, to philosophy, to the codification of Bushido, the way of the warrior. Though once defined by battle, Bushido now emphasized loyalty, honor, discipline, and service. The sword, worn always at the side, became less a weapon of war and more a symbol of spirit. To be samurai was no longer to fight, but to embody a code, to live as an example of steadfastness in a peaceful world. Yet peace, though precious, is never eternal. Beneath the quiet order, tensions gathered. The samurai, proud yet increasingly removed from combat, faced financial strain as stipends failed to keep pace with inflation. Merchants, officially at the bottom of society, grew wealthy through trade, undermining the old hierarchy. Farmers shouldered heavy taxes, sometimes rebelling when burdens grew too great. For now, the shogunate managed these strains. But in time, they would swell into challenges that even Tokugawa order could not contain. Still, to the people of 17th century Japan, the peace was a blessing beyond measure. For the first time in centuries, children grew up without knowing war. Villages thrived, art flourished, and roads tied the nation together in a fabric of culture and commerce. The dream carried by Nobunaga, Hideyoshi, and Ieyasu had been realized, not in fire and conquest, but in quiet and order. Can you picture it? A farmer standing in his field, looking across green rows of rice shimmering in the summer sun, no smoke of war rising on the horizon. A samurai walking home at dusk, the sound of a temple bell tolling softly, the glow of lanterns lighting his way. In these moments lies the true legacy of the Tokugawa Peace. A legacy not of battles won, but of lives lived in the shelter of calm. The age of war had ended, but the story of the samurai was far from over. Their swords still gleamed, their spirit endured, and in the quiet of the Tokugawa Peace, they began to transform once again. The next chapter would be less about conquest and more about philosophy, art, and the refinement of their identity. The way of the warrior, once forged in blood, would now be shaped in stillness. The clamour of battle has faded, the roads are safe, the villages at peace, and the great Tokugawa Shogunate governs with order. Yet, in this long stillness, the samurai do not lay down their arms entirely. Their swords remain at their sides, gleaming not with the wear of combat, but with the polish of ritual. The sword becomes more than a weapon. It becomes the soul of the warrior. To understand the samurai of the Tokugawa Peace, one must understand the katana. Curved, slender, razor-sharp, it was the product of centuries of refinement, forged by master smiths who folded steel upon itself dozens of times. The katana was both tool and art. Its blade shimmered with the subtle wave-like patterns of tempering, called hamon, unique to each sword as fingerprints are to a man. Its balance was perfect, allowing swift strikes, yet its beauty invited reverence. To draw such a blade was to touch not only steel, but spirit. Imagine a smith at his forge in the quiet of a mountain village. The air shimmers with heat, sparks fly, and the sound of hammer on metal rings like a heartbeat. He works with patience, folding the steel again and again, driving out weakness, layering strength into the blade. Hours stretch into days, days into weeks, until finally the sword emerges, not just a weapon, but a vessel of discipline, devotion, and skill. To hold such a blade is to feel the weight of generations. For the samurai, the katana came to symbolize honor itself. The Tokugawa Peace gave fewer opportunities to use it in battle, but it became essential in ritual, in daily attire, and in the philosophy of Bushido. Samurai wore two swords, the katana and the shorter wakizashi, together called the daisho, meaning big little. The daisho was more than ornament. It was a sign of rank, a visible mark that set the samurai apart. To step into the streets without them was unthinkable. The act of wearing the sword carried ceremony. A samurai adjusted the knot of his obi belt, the scabbards angled just so, the hilts within easy reach. When he entered a house, he placed the long sword at the entrance, keeping the short blade by his side. In tea houses and courts, the presence of the sword was both a reassurance and a reminder. Here walked a man of duty, honor, and discipline. But the sword was not only carried, it was studied. Schools of swordsmanship flourished in the Tokugawa years, each with its own philosophy and style. Students trained in dojos, barefoot on polished wooden floors, their breath rising and falling with each strike of the bamboo practice sword. Masters taught not only technique but mindset, the calm focus needed to strike decisively, the humility to sheath the blade without arrogance, the wisdom to understand that the greatest victory is the one won without drawing steel. Among these masters was Miyamoto Musashi, whose legend still stirs the imagination. A swordsman of unmatched skill, he wandered Japan in the early 17th century, challenging rivals and defeating them with a style both unorthodox and effective. His Book of Five Rings taught not only swordsmanship, but the philosophy of strategy, discipline, and adaptability. Musashi's life embodied the way of the sword, not as brute force, but as a path of self-mastery. The philosophy of Bushido crystallized in this era. Bushido, the way of the warrior, was not codified in one single book, but evolved from centuries of practice and reflection. It emphasized loyalty to one's lord, honor in all actions, courage in the face of death, and compassion toward the weak. The sword became the physical embodiment of these ideals. To carry it was to bear the responsibility of justice, to remind oneself daily of the code that defined a samurai's life. Can you imagine the weight of such a symbol? To wake each morning, tie your sash, and feel the scabbard press against your side. To know that at any moment, in an insult or dispute, the sword could be drawn, and with it, life or death decided. To live with such an object of power always near demanded constant discipline, lest anger or pride tempt one into misuse. The sword was not simply a tool, it was a mirror of the soul. Rituals reinforced this reverence. Sword cleaning became almost sacred. A samurai sitting quietly, cloth in hand, oiling the blade, polishing the fittings, ensuring every detail gleamed. To neglect a sword was to neglect oneself. Families passed blades down through generations, each one carrying the spirit of ancestors. A katana was not merely owned, it was inherited, cherished, and entrusted. The sword also became entwined with the practice of seppuku, ritual suicide. When a samurai's honor was beyond repair, whether through failure, betrayal, or disgrace, he could restore it through this ultimate act. With his blade, he ended his own life in solemn ceremony, often in the presence of witnesses. Though terrible in its finality, seppuku was seen as the purest expression of loyalty and courage, the sword serving as both judge and redeemer. Yet the Tokugawa years were not only about solemnity. The way of the sword also infused art and culture. In paintings and prints, samurai were depicted with gleaming katanas, symbols of elegance as much as strength. Poets likened blades to the moon's reflection on water, beautiful and fleeting. In theatre, the clashing of swords on stage thrilled audiences, dramatizing loyalty, betrayal, and the weight of honor. The sword became not just a weapon of war, but a central motif of imagination. Can you picture an evening in Edo, lanterns glowing along narrow streets, the sound of shamisen music drifting from a tea house? A samurai walks past, his daisho gleaming at his side. Children pause their play to watch. Women bow respectfully. Merchants step aside. In that instant, the sword is not drawn, not used, but it speaks volumes of authority, of duty, of the spirit of a class that shaped the nation. The way of the sword was not without contradiction. While samurai honored their blades, battles grew ever more rare. Many lived their entire lives without drawing blood. Their swords, so carefully tended, were symbols more than instruments. Yet in this paradox lay the essence of the Tokugawa age. The warrior transformed into guardian, the weapon transformed into spirit. By the 18th century, Bushido writings stressed morality and discipline more than combat. Samurai were urged to live with humility, to govern justly, to cultivate the arts as well as the martial skills. Calligraphy, poetry, and painting joined swordsmanship as paths of self-cultivation. The katana remained central, but as a compass pointing not only toward battle, but toward virtue. The stillness of the Tokugawa Peace allowed this transformation. Without constant war, the sword could become a symbol of philosophy, a mirror for reflection. The samurai, once defined by conquest, now found their identity in restraint. The edge of the blade gleamed less with blood than with the polish of devotion. And yet, deep within the soul of the samurai, there lingered the memory of war. The katana whispered of battles past, of ancestors who fought with courage, of a legacy born in fire. To carry it was to carry history itself, to remember that peace was built on the sacrifices of those who had come before. Can you imagine kneeling in a quiet room, holding a family blade, running your fingers along its hilt, feeling the weight of steel and memory? Would you sense pride or burden or both? Such was the life of the samurai in the way of the sword, a life balanced between past and present, between peace and readiness, between symbol and reality. The sword, in the end, became the truest emblem of the samurai spirit. More than armor, more than castles, more than any title, it defined their place in the world. And as the Tokugawa Peace stretched on, century after century, the katana gleamed silently at the heart of their identity, a reminder of what it meant to live and to die as samurai. The sword gleamed at a samurai's side, but in the long peace of Tokugawa Japan, his life was shaped as much by brush and ritual as by steel. The warrior of this age was not only a soldier but a steward, a scholar, and often a patron of the arts. To understand the samurai fully, one must look not only at the battlefield, but also at the tea room, the scroll, and the quiet garden where culture and spirit intertwined. Imagine a castle town in the early 18th century. The streets bustle with life, merchants selling cloth and rice, children running in play, peasants arriving with their harvests. At the town's heart rises the Lord's castle, and within its walls, samurai families live with order and dignity. Their days are shaped not by campaigns, but by duty, study, and ceremony. And in the stillness of peace, a culture flourishes unlike any that came before. One of the most treasured arts among samurai was the tea ceremony, or chanoyu. More than the simple act of drinking tea, it was a practice of mindfulness, elegance, and humility. Picture a samurai entering a small tea room, bowing low as he passes through the doorway. He kneels on tatami mats, his sword set aside, leaving behind the weight of rank and power. The host prepares the tea with deliberate grace, scooping powdered matcha, whisking it into froth, presenting it in a simple bowl of ceramic. The room is sparse yet profound. A scroll with a single brushstroke of calligraphy, a flower arranged in quiet balance, the faint aroma of incense. For the samurai, this ritual was a chance to step away from duty, to find harmony and stillness, to cultivate inner discipline as surely as he honed his martial skill. Poetry, too, became central to samurai life. The short, delicate verses of haiku captured fleeting beauty, the cry of a cuckoo, the silence of falling snow, the glow of the moon over rippling water. Warriors composed poems before battles in earlier centuries. Now, in the Tokugawa calm, they wrote them in gardens, on journeys, or during festivals. A samurai might sit beneath a cherry tree, brush in hand, recording in 17 syllables a moment that passed like breath. Through poetry, the warrior learned to see the world with eyes of stillness, to honor impermanence, to weave the subtleties of nature into his spirit. Calligraphy was another art deeply woven into the warrior's life. With brush and ink, samurai copied sutras, wrote letters, and composed verses. The brushstroke was seen as a reflection of the soul, strong yet fluid, precise yet alive. In each character, there was discipline, elegance, and intent. To watch a samurai practice calligraphy was to see the same focus he brought to the draw of a sword, but expressed in ink rather than steel. Can you imagine the quiet of a samurai household in the evening? The light of an oil lamp flickers. A father sits with his child, teaching him the strokes of characters on fresh paper, the brush moving steadily under his hand. Outside, crickets sing, and the air is warm with summer. In that moment, the culture of the warrior is not one of war, but of connection, of passing down discipline through art. The theatre, too, found patrons among samurai. Kabuki, with its colourful costumes, painted faces, and dramatic gestures, captured stories of love, betrayal, and loyalty. Audiences crowded into wooden playhouses, the stage lit by lanterns, the actors' voices carrying through the night. Though some officials disapproved of Kabuki's boldness, many samurai enjoyed its tales, seeing in them reflections of their own struggles between duty and desire. In the puppet theatre of Bunraku, epic stories of loyalty and tragedy unfolded, performed with lifelike puppets, guided by unseen hands. These performances reminded samurai and commoners alike of the values and costs of loyalty, sacrifice, and love. Within their own homes, samurai cultivated gardens as spaces of reflection. Stones, water, moss, and sand, arranged with deliberate care, created landscapes of harmony. A trickle of water might symbolize a mountain stream, a raked pattern in gravel, the rippling of waves. Walking through such a garden, a samurai could reflect on the impermanence of life, on the need for balance between action and stillness. These gardens became places where warrior and philosopher could meet, where the sound of a single bell could echo louder than the roar of battle. Can you see it? A samurai standing in his garden at dusk, the lanterns beginning to glow, the cicadas singing in the trees. He holds a scroll of poetry in one hand, the hilt of his sword resting gently against his hip. In that moment, he embodies both strength and subtlety, a man shaped by discipline, softened by culture, grounded in the stillness of his time. Education was another cornerstone of samurai culture in the Tokugawa Peace. Schools for samurai children taught not only martial skills, but also reading, writing, and Confucian philosophy. Young boys memorized lessons of loyalty and respect, learning that to serve one's lord faithfully was the highest duty. They studied Chinese classics, copied poems, and trained in etiquette, preparing to become not only warriors, but also wise administrators. Samurai girls, too, received education in household management, etiquette, and sometimes literature, preparing them to support their families with grace and dignity. The samurai also fostered traditions of etiquette and ritual in daily life. From the way a guest was greeted, to how one bowed, to the precise manner of serving tea or food, every action carried weight. These rituals were not empty gestures, they were expressions of respect, order, and balance. Just as discipline guided the draw of a sword, so too did it guide the placement of a cup, the writing of a letter, the tilt of a bow. Religion remained central in shaping samurai culture. Zen Buddhism, with its emphasis on simplicity and mindfulness, influenced art, gardens, tea, and meditation. Shinto shrines reminded warriors of their ties to nature and ancestors. Confucian ideals reinforced loyalty, hierarchy, and filial duty. Together, these currents created a tapestry of thought and practice that guided the daily lives of warriors. Even in leisure, the samurai sought refinement. Falconry and horseback archery remained noble pastimes, while board games like Go and Shogi tested strategy and focus. Festivals filled the calendar with moments of joy: cherry blossom viewing in spring, fireworks in summer, harvest celebrations in autumn, and temple bells ringing in winter's quiet. These rhythms of life gave structure and beauty to a world no longer defined by constant battle. Can you imagine walking through Edo during a festival night? Lanterns glowing along every street, food stalls offering grilled skewers and sweet dumplings, music drifting from shamisen strings. Samurai walk among townsfolk, enjoying the sights, their presence respected, but also part of the community's joy. Children laugh, fireworks burst overhead, and for a moment, all divisions blur in the shared wonder of the celebration. The culture of the warrior in the Tokugawa age reveals a truth often overlooked. The samurai were not only fighters, but also custodians of beauty, ritual, and learning. Their lives held contradiction. Swords at their sides, yet brushes in their hands. Bound to hierarchy, yet sensitive to fleeting blossoms. Proud in discipline, yet humble in ceremony. These contradictions were not weaknesses, but expressions of balance, of a class adapting to peace by embracing culture as deeply as they once embraced war. As decades turned into centuries, the samurai's identity became inseparable from these cultural practices. The way of the sword remained their emblem, but the way of the brush, the cup of tea, the poem, and the garden defined the rhythm of their lives. They became not only protectors of land, but also guardians of tradition, carrying forward values that shaped Japan's spirit. And yet, even as the culture of the warrior flourished, beyond the horizon, shadows gathered. Foreign ships would one day return, bringing not only trade, but demands, not only goods, but guns of greater power. The stillness of the Tokugawa order would tremble, and the samurai would be forced once more to redefine themselves. For now, though, let us linger in their world of peace. The sword rests in its scabbard, the brush glides across paper, the tea whisk hums softly in its bowl. The culture of the warrior is alive, serene, refined, and deeply human. The peace of Tokugawa Japan stretches like a still pond, calm and seemingly endless. For more than 2 centuries, the rhythms of life flow with order. Daimyo traveling the highways to Edo, samurai teaching their sons discipline, merchants quietly growing rich, farmers tending their rice fields. The Sengoku policy, Japan's closed country, keeps foreign influences at bay, save for the single window at Nagasaki where Dutch and Chinese traders dock their ships. To those within, the outside world feels distant, almost unreal. Yet beyond the horizon, the world is changing swiftly. And in the 19th century, those changes come knocking on Japan's shores. Picture the summer of 1853. The sea off Edo Bay ripples with an unfamiliar sight. Towering black ships, their smoke rising like storm clouds. They are commanded by Commodore Matthew Perry of the United States Navy, sent to demand the opening of Japan to trade. Their cannons gleam, their decks bristle with power. Villagers along the coast gather in fearful awe, whispering of the black ships that seem to breathe fire. For Japan, sheltered for generations, the moment is like a stone dropped into still water. Ripples spread, unsettling everything. The shogunate, long the guardian of order, is shaken. Its officials, accustomed to ceremony and slow negotiation, now face foreign demands backed by steel and steam. The treaties signed in the following years, unequal and humiliating, opened Japan's ports to the west. For many samurai, this is a wound to pride, a sign that the shogunate can no longer defend the land as their ancestors once did against the Mongols. The divine winds that had once saved Japan seem absent. Now the foreign ships come and go unhindered. Can you imagine being a samurai in those days? To walk along the shore and see ships unlike any you have known, their masts high, their hulls iron, their guns capable of destroying fortresses with a single volley, to know that your sword, symbol of centuries of honor, cannot stand against such force, would you feel anger, helplessness, a restless determination to change? For many, it was all of these at once. The Tokugawa order begins to tremble. Merchants profit from new trade, their wealth growing while samurai stipends remain fixed and shrinking in value. Discontent spreads through the warrior class, proud yet increasingly impoverished. Peasants too feel the strain as taxes weigh heavily, while famine and hardship stir unrest. The balance of society, so carefully maintained for centuries, begins to tilt. New ideas drift into Japan with the foreign ships, Western science, technology, and political thought. Some samurai see opportunity, studying foreign languages, firearms, and medicine. Others cling fiercely to tradition, demanding the expulsion of foreigners, calling for a return to purity. The slogan Sono Joy, revere the emperor, expel the barbarians, spreads like wildfire, rallying those who believe the shogunate has failed in its duty. The emperor, long a figure of ceremony, becomes a symbol of resistance and hope. In Kyoto, his presence grows in importance as young samurai and scholars gather around the idea of restoring imperial power. For centuries, the emperor had been distant, overshadowed by shoguns. Now his image becomes a rallying cry for change. Meanwhile, the shogunate struggles to adapt. It purchases modern weapons, builds Western-style ships, and sends students abroad to learn foreign sciences. Yet its efforts come too late, too slow. Internal divisions deepen, with some daimyo supporting reform and others resisting. The once iron grip of the Tokugawa begins to slip, each new crisis widening the cracks. Can you picture the streets of Edo in this time of uncertainty? Merchants selling foreign cloth and clocks alongside rice and sake. Samurai walking with their swords at their sides, yet their faces marked by unease, their purses growing thin. Posters nailed to walls calling for loyalty to the emperor, for the expulsion of foreigners. The city hums with tension, as if everyone feels the storm gathering. In the provinces, domains like Satsuma and Choshu rise as centers of opposition. Their samurai embrace Western weapons while rallying around the call to restore the emperor. Young men train with rifles as well as swords, studying gunnery and tactics imported from abroad. The contradictions of the age are striking. Samurai in top knots practicing with cannons, wearing swords at their waists while learning to drill in Western fashion. The old and the new collide, and from their friction sparks revolution. The clash is not only political, but emotional. For centuries, the samurai had lived as symbols of loyalty and guardianship. Now many feel betrayed by the shogunate, which they see as weak and corrupt. Their loyalty shifts toward the emperor, whom they revere as the true embodiment of Japan's spirit. Yet even in their devotion, they face a painful truth. The age of the sword alone is passing. Steamships and rifles now dictate power, not the gleam of a katana. Still, the spirit of Bushido burns fiercely. In the movements to overthrow the shogunate, samurai march with the same determination as their ancestors, ready to sacrifice themselves for the greater cause. Their battles are fought with both rifles and swords. Their courage is real as ever, even as the world around them changes. Can you imagine the turmoil of such a time? To grow up in peace, studying calligraphy and tea ceremony, only to find yourself in middle age facing civil war, foreign ships, and weapons that render your traditions obsolete. To feel pride in the past and fear for the future, yet to carry on, driven by duty. Such was the life of countless samurai in the shadows of change. The final years of the Tokugawa Shogunate are marked by rising unrest, assassinations, and rebellions. Ronin, masterless samurai, roam the cities, some seeking revenge, others justice. Streets run with whispers of plots, and nights are filled with the clang of steel as loyalists and shogunate agents clash in alleys and tea houses. The calm of Tokugawa Peace is gone, replaced by a restless anticipation of what must come next. By the 1860s, the crisis can no longer be contained. The shogunate's attempts at reform fail to satisfy either conservatives or radicals. The emperor's supporters grow stronger, and domains unite against Tokugawa rule. Civil war looms, and with it, the end of an age. The shadows of change are deepening. The black ships have brought more than foreign trade. They have brought the dawn of a new world. The samurai, heirs to centuries of tradition, stand at a crossroads. Ahead lies uncertainty, revolution, and the question that will decide their fate. Can the way of the warrior survive in an age no longer shaped by the sword? The shadows have deepened. The black ships brought more than steam and smoke. They brought a tide that could not be turned back. By the mid-19th century, Japan stands on the edge of transformation. The old order, upheld by the Tokugawa Shogunate for over 250 years, now trembles beneath the weight of change. And at the heart of this transformation stand the samurai, guardians of a world that is fading before their eyes. In 1868, the crisis breaks into open revolution. Supporters of the emperor, rallying under the banners of Satsuma, Choshu, and other powerful domains marched to restore imperial rule. The Tokugawa Shogunate, weakened and divided, struggles to hold its ground. The conflict becomes known as the Boshin War, a civil war that pits samurai against samurai, brothers against brothers, in a final clash of loyalty and destiny. Can you picture the streets of Kyoto in those days? The emperor's palace glowing with renewed energy, young men in both samurai robes and Western-style uniforms marching in its defense. The cries of "Revere the Emperor" ring out, echoed in villages and towns. For centuries, the emperor had been a figure of ceremony. Now he becomes the living symbol of a new Japan. Battles erupt across the land. At Toba Fushimi, near Kyoto, imperial forces, armed with modern rifles and artillery, defeat the shogunate's troops. The outcome is as much about technology as courage. The rifles of the new age outmatch the swords and muskets of the old. From there, the tide turns swiftly. Edo, the seat of Tokugawa power, surrenders without great bloodshed. The shogun steps aside, and imperial banners rise across the city. The Tokugawa era ends, and the Meiji era begins. Yet the fall of the shogunate does not end the struggle of the samurai. Many who had fought for centuries under the Tokugawa find themselves displaced, their stipends reduced or abolished. Their status, once unquestioned, erodes as Japan modernizes. The new Meiji government abolishes the class divisions that had defined society. Samurai, who once stood proudly at the top, are told they are no longer a separate class. The sword, once the emblem of their spirit, is banned from public wear in 1876. Imagine the bitterness of a samurai walking through the streets of Tokyo, no longer Edo, his daisho forbidden at his side, his stipend gone, his pride wounded. He sees merchants, once beneath him in rank, thriving with new wealth. He sees young men in Western uniforms, trained in foreign drill, carrying rifles instead of swords. The world he knew has ended, and he must decide whether to adapt or resist. Some samurai embrace the changes. They study abroad, serve in the new government, or become officers in the modern conscript army. Their discipline and education make them valuable in the new age. Others turn to business or teaching, carrying their skills into civilian life. But many cannot bear the loss of their identity. For them, the fall of the samurai is not only a political shift, but a personal tragedy. The unraveling of everything their ancestors lived and died for. Rebellions break out, the most famous led by Saigo Takamori, once a hero of the Meiji Restoration. Saigo, disillusioned by the government's abandonment of samurai values, leads thousands of former warriors in the Satsuma Rebellion of 1877. Picture the hills of Kyushu alive with the banners of samurai, their swords gleaming in defiance against rifles and cannons. They fight bravely, charging in traditional fashion, their cries carrying the echoes of centuries. Yet modern weaponry proves decisive. The rebellion is crushed, and with it ends the last great stand of the samurai. Saigo's death becomes legend, seen by many as noble, even as defeat. In him, people see the embodiment of loyalty, honor, and sacrifice, virtues that transcend the fall of a class. Statues will one day be raised in his memory, not as a rebel, but as a symbol of the samurai spirit enduring even as their era passes. Can you imagine standing on the battlefield of Shiroyama, where Saigo and his followers made their final stand? The smoke of rifles fills the air, cannon fire shakes the earth, and the cries of samurai charging against impossible odds echo across the hills. Would you see tragedy or heroism or both entwined together? For those who lived through it, the sight was unforgettable. The end of an age, the last roar of the samurai. The Meiji government continues its reforms. Railways crisscross the land, factories rise, and schools teach new sciences alongside traditional wisdom. The army becomes modern, filled with conscripted farmers' sons, rather than hereditary warriors. The emperor, once distant, now rides in public processions, his image spread across the land as the focus of national unity. Japan steps into the modern world with speed and determination, eager to prove itself equal to the great powers of the West. But even as the samurai class dissolves, their legacy remains woven into the fabric of the new Japan. Bushido, once the code of a warrior elite, is transformed into a national ethic, teaching loyalty, sacrifice, and discipline to all. The sword, though banned from public wear, is remembered as a symbol of honor, its spirit living on in the nation's imagination. The stories of loyalty, bravery, and sacrifice continue to inspire, even as the world of castles and banners fades into history. The fall of the samurai is both loss and rebirth. It marks the end of a class, but also the beginning of a modern nation. The warrior's role shifts from carrying swords on the battlefield to carrying ideals in the heart of a people. The Japan that emerges is different, yet it carries forward the memory of those who came before. Can you see it? A former samurai in the 1880s, walking along a railway platform as a steam engine whistles and hisses. He wears a Western-style suit, yet his posture remains proud, his eyes steady. In his home, a katana rests in a place of honor, polished though no longer worn. His children speak of modern schools and foreign inventions, yet they bow to him with respect, knowing he carries within him the spirit of an age now gone. The fall of the samurai is not a simple story of defeat. It is a story of transformation, of resilience, of memory. Their era ends in the clash of rifles and cannons, but their spirit endures, reshaped, reimagined, yet never forgotten. The warrior's code, once bound to a class, now belongs to a nation. The twilight of the samurai has come. The banners are lowered, the swords sheathed, the castles quiet. Yet in the silence, the legacy remains, waiting to be remembered in stories, in rituals, in the very character of Japan itself. The battles have ended, the banners have been furled, the castles stand silent, and the laws of the Meiji era have dissolved the class that once ruled Japan. The samurai, as they had existed for centuries, no longer walk the roads in pairs, swords gleaming at their sides. And yet, their spirit does not vanish. It lingers like the echo of a temple bell after the strike, soft but enduring, resonating across time. To speak of the legacy of the samurai is to speak of more than war. Their memory lies not only in the clash of steel, but in the ideals, stories, and images that have shaped Japan, and indeed, the imagination of the world. The way of the warrior, once bound to duty and land, now lives on as philosophy, culture, and inspiration. Picture a modern Japanese household in the late 19th century. The father wears a Western suit to work in government or business, yet in the alcove of his home, a katana rests upon a stand, its blade polished, its hilt wrapped in silk. The sword is no longer carried in the streets, yet it remains a family treasure, passed from ancestor to descendant, a reminder of sacrifice and honor. Children grow up hearing tales of brave warriors, of loyalty kept to the end, of swords drawn for justice. The The samurai may be gone, but their memory continues to teach. Bushido, the code that once guided a class, becomes a broader ethic. In schools, children are taught the virtues of discipline, respect, and loyalty. In the army, officers speak of courage and sacrifice, drawing upon the memory of samurai spirit to inspire modern soldiers. In daily life, ideals of perseverance, duty to family, and devotion to work echo the old code. Though reshaped, the heart of Bushido remains, a quiet current flowing beneath Japan's modernization. The arts too carry the samurai's legacy. Their poetry and calligraphy inspire new generations. Their gardens, temples, and tea rituals continue to shape Japan's aesthetic, emphasizing balance, simplicity, and harmony. Even as factories rise and railways stretch across the land, the cultural practices refined in the Tokugawa Peace endure, offering a counterpoint to rapid change. The samurai spirit finds expression not only in steel, but in brushstrokes, in the arrangement of flowers, in the rhythm of a tea whisk. Can you imagine walking through Kyoto today, down narrow streets where wooden houses lean together, their paper screens glowing softly with lamplight? Behind one gate lies a garden of raked gravel and moss, as serene as it was centuries ago. To stand there is to feel the presence of the samurai, not in armor or banners, but in stillness, in the echo of their discipline expressed through beauty. Beyond Japan, the samurai capture the world's imagination. Travelers and scholars write of them. Artists paint them. Novelists weave them into stories. In the West, they become symbols of honor and mystery, figures who stand for a way of life, both foreign and inspiring. Plays and films in later centuries will carry their images further, shaping how the world envisions Japan as a land where warriors once lived by codes of loyalty and grace. Yet the legacy of the samurai is not without complexity. They were guardians, but also rulers who demanded heavy taxes. They embodied loyalty, but also carried out ruthless wars. They cherished art and poetry, yet also enforced strict hierarchies. Their memory is not one of perfection, but of humanity, of a class that strove for ideals even while entangled in the struggles of power and survival. To remember the samurai is to embrace both their light and their shadow. Still, their enduring image is one of inspiration. The katana, though no longer drawn in battle, remains a symbol of spirit. To see its curve gleaming in a museum or resting in a family alcove is to glimpse not only steel, but the centuries of discipline and devotion it represents. The sword has become myth, carrying within it the soul of a nation. Can you imagine holding such a blade, carefully lifting it from its stand, feeling its weight in your hands? To know that it once belonged to a man who lived by Bushido, who served his lord, who walked the roads of Edo, or fought upon the fields of Sengoku. Would you feel pride, reverence, or a quiet awe? Perhaps all of these, for the legacy of the sword is not only history, but emotion, a connection across time. Even in the modern world, echoes of the samurai spirit surface in subtle ways. In the discipline of martial arts practiced across the globe, the philosophy of focus and respect mirrors Bushido. In literature and cinema, the lone warrior striving for honor captures imaginations far beyond Japan. In daily life, the values of perseverance, humility, and dedication reflect a heritage shaped by centuries of warrior ideals. The fall of the samurai did not erase them. It transformed them into memory, legend, and inspiration. Their castles may crumble, their banners fade, but their story endures in every whispered tale. every carefully tended garden, every polished sword resting quietly in its scabbard. Can you see it now, at the close of this long journey? The mist over Heian fields where the first mounted archers rode, the banners of Minamoto and Taira clashing at Dan no Ura, the walls of Kamakura standing strong, the storms of the Mongols sweeping the sea, the chaos of Sengoku battles, the thunder of arquebusiers at Nagashino, the brilliance of Nobunaga, Hideyoshi, and Ieyasu, the quiet streets of Edo, the brush of calligraphy, the whisk of tea, the stillness of Zen gardens, the black ships in the bay, the fall of the shogunate, the last charge of Saigo Takamori, and now, the silence of memory, where the spirit of the warrior lingers. The samurai have walked with us across 1,000 years, their lives a blend of sword and soul, of conflict and culture, of loss and legacy. Their story reminds us that even when eras end, the values and dreams of those who lived them can endure, shaping the future in unseen ways. So let the screen dim, let the air grow still. Rest in the knowledge that the samurai, though gone, remain with us. Not in armor, but in spirit. Their legacy is carved not only in steel, but in memory, culture, and the quiet strength of the human heart. Good night, and may the echoes of their story bring you peace.